thank you all so much for the invitation to be here this evening. I know some of you may be aware of my efforts in the past in relation to the quantification of male violence and criminality in Queensland and the impacts upon women's and girls' rights to privacy, dignity and safety. I would like to address another aspect of male violence, and that is domestic and family violence, and how the behaviour of some trans activists can be seen to follow the same patterns of behaviour identified in men who use violence, coercion and control in their intimate relationships. At the outset, I feel it's imperative to make clear that the people most impacted by the behaviour of males who might identify as transgender is the women who are partnered and the children of those males living in a perfect storm of what I'm about to talk about. And at the outset, I want to make clear my respect and deference to those with the lived experience in this regard. The title of my discussion today is Using the Duluth Wheel to Identify Abusive, Coercive and Controlling Behaviours. So some of you may be aware of the Duluth Wheel. It was created in the 80s in Minnesota, and it's a wheel. It has a number of spokes, and on the exterior there is recognition of physical and sexual violence. In the interior, there are the other ways that violence and coercion and control is perpetrated by males or perpetrators who use violence, coercion and control. Stark is a person who has been quite prevalent in domestic and family violence research and said, I'm just going to have to move my things because I do not remember the quote. Coercive control is a strategic course of oppressive conduct that typically characterized by frequent but low-level abuse and sexual coercion in combination with tactics to intimidate, degrade, and isolate and control victims. Now, anyone who has followed Fair Go for Queensland Women, which is a page that I'm involved with on Facebook and Twitter, will know that I frequently refer to the long-term research that talks about the foundations of male violence against women. And this is a representation of that here. So male violence against women is founded upon, and you can see it in your everyday life, in sexist jokes, sexist language, and objectification of women. So pornography is, when we talk about objectification of women, that's number one. So number two is traditional roles and the glass ceiling and belief in the rigid sex stereotypes of women and men. And so my argument from my perspective is that if you are proposing that to be a woman is to adhere to sexist stereotypes, then you are already on the second rung on the foundations of male violence towards women. This graphic is quite old, in fact, and is based upon research that is decades old. So my query, I guess this is my position, when you talk about sexist stereotypes, meaning this is what a woman is, you are already on the second rung of what it means about male violence against women. So this is a representation of the Duluth wheel, which was, as I said, developed in the early 80s in Minnesota by some wonderful women who, as all efforts to address male violence against women in the domestic violence setting, it was led by women. So you will see there are 8 spokes to the wheel. And today I would like to just run through and talk about how those behaviours can be seen as parallel to some of the behaviours by transactivists. So when the Duluth wheel talks about making women feel afraid, making women feel like they are walking on eggshells, making women worried about speaking up, destroying a woman's property. On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see some of the behaviours of transactivists that I feel may represent behaviours that align with that spoke of the Duluth wheel. So when we talk about using intimidation, when individuals have in the past used smoke bombs, we can see that as an intimidatory tactic linked to dousing and a high risk behaviour when we speak about it in policing and male pattern violence terms. Targeted harassment of prominent women, which has obviously been observed most identifiably by J.K. Rowling. We can see that when people target women, they are trying to make other women afraid to speak up. And so this, therefore, is a behaviour that is evident in the Duluth wheel. Here are some examples that I have taken from the internet. Obviously, there are many, many more available. Using weapons is certainly one that is prevalent. The second wheel that I wanted to, second spoke of the wheel to talk about is using emotional abuse. So putting her down, making comments about her looks, making comments about her parenting capacity. These are things that some individuals who use violence, coercion, and control try to do in order to wear women down. And this is also evident in the behaviour of transactivists. These are some of the examples, obviously not representative or entirely like the entirety, but in order to say that women are a stereotype, that's quite abusive. So I have included the notion that having a gold purse means that you are a woman in these examples. you will also note that some of our organisations that are heavily involved in stopping male violence against women actually disagree with the behaviour that some trans activists are demonstrating. And I think it would be nice to see a little bit more of that occurring. The third spoke of the wheel hardly needs any introduction, and I'm very sorry if this causes distress for anyone. Using coercion and threats is one tactical strategy that males do use when they use violence, coercion, and control in their intimate relationships, and it can be seen in the behaviours of trans activists. And here are just a couple of examples. Some women have been quite seriously and negatively impacted by trans activists in the attempt to make them stop talking about their worries and stop talking about what they are worried about and their concerns in relation to trans activism and the institution of self-ID policies within government and society. So in terms of using economic abuse, there have been individuals who have actively targeted women who have sought to speak out about this. And it has resulted in them having limited or less access to economic freedom. And I submit that this is an example of economic abuse by activists, which mirrors the behaviour of some males who use violence, coercion, and control in their intimate relationships. So there are women who have had their businesses shut down. There are women who have had their workplaces made so uncomfortable to be in and felt unsafe. In the case, I think, of Kathleen Stock, this impairs a woman's economic capacity, and that is, I submit, economic abuse. Obviously, as demonstrated in the screenshot, in the screen below, stopping women from accessing their own bank account is an example of economic abuse. The Duluth Wheel also talks about male privilege, and so it talks, in this respect, it talks about males using their status as the head of the household or the man of the house, as the person who makes all of the decisions and the person who can veto anything that another person in the household says. And so in that respect, I submit that there appears to be behaviours in the trans activist community where individuals might try and veto women's freedom of association, freedom to say whatever they would like to say. And it is also evident, particularly and most egregiously, in the disparate, the way that inclusive language is promoted within the community. It is quite evident that all of the language that is being changed is about women. Male language and language about men is not being changed at all in any meaningful way. And so that is what I mean when I say male privilege. Males are not being incredibly impacted by this, and they are not being impacted when females join their sports. They are not being negatively impacted in terms of inclusive language, because this language is being directed primarily and focally towards women. I'm sorry, Jen, I'm just having a bit of a...
That's all right. Do you want to switch off for a moment and have a cough and a drink and then get back to us?
No, I'm good.
You okay? All right. Well done.
Okay, sorry.
No drama.
Sorry, another spike in the wheel is using children. And I think for a lot of women and mums, this is really important and really quite a concern. When a man who is using violence, coercion, and control in an intimate relationship uses children, he might be using children in the ways demonstrated on the left. In terms of the use of gender identity, children are being, perhaps, like lots of people have considered, that they are sending their children to school and those children are being indoctrinated to views that they do not believe in. And certainly some children appear to be being told things that are simply not true. So some individuals have made comment around how conversion therapy, in inverted commas, bills and other bills are encroaching upon parental responsibilities and encroaching upon people's freedom of belief, and therefore imposing on people beliefs that they do not hold. Some of those examples might include the erosion of safeguarding that most people generally understood until not all that long ago, where it was accepted that an adult person cannot and should not ask children to contact them privately. Lots of individuals using from within the confines of gender have sought to ask children to contact them privately, and a lot of people are very worried about that because of the safeguarding issues that have come along with that. There is also, as evidenced in the slide, is telling children that a male is a girl that is someone to be emulated and thought after, as well as using knives to talk about protecting children, which I'm not sure has been done by women who talk about gender critical issues or radical feminist issues. This is an example from an article that is over 5 years old, where in Queensland, a parent who took their child to a medical professional, the medical professional told them that the child, who was about 3.5 years old, could possibly have issues in relation to suicide and self-harming. And I'm not quite sure that that is appropriate. minimizing and denying and blaming. So this also is a behavior utilized by persons who engage in violence, coercion, and control of their partners. So making light of persons' worries. And we can see that every day in the commentary regarding women's worries about males being enabled to enter women's spaces. And here are a couple of recent examples from Queensland and an older example from an individual from the UK. So it seems that regardless of what women say, our worries will be discounted. Using isolation is a further spoke in the wheel, and an example of that might be disallowing women to meet on their own without males present, telling women that their views are not okay, and using slurs to refer to women who wish to meet. So trying to smear women who seek to meet. And in November last year, there was a Queensland example of that behaviour, and a further example later of individuals seeking to find where women were meeting and try and attend where they were meeting, which could harken back to the use of intimidation. In the bottom right-hand side, you will see that a federal politician has attempted to stop a woman attending Australia to talk about women's issues, and that, I submit, is an attempt to isolate Australian women from the international community of women who have a very genuine concern about what is occurring. When we talk about domestic and family violence, one of the things that we need to talk about is interrupting behaviours and shifting behaviours. And sometimes you can do that, and sometimes it's about just moving forward as an individual away from that individual. So in terms of this situation, keeping in mind what we know about domestic and family violence practice and how we address domestic and family violence practice, using the Safe and Together model, one of the things that we do is that we document behaviours. So we keep a very clear record of what has occurred. So some of the things that we talk about in terms of this is being really clear in our language around what has occurred. And I think Redux and some other places do a very good job of that. For instance, when they have spoken recently about the physical assault of a woman by a male who appears to be a trans activist, and has recently been charged. So naming the behaviours accurately and being descriptive is important. So when we are talking about behaviours, being really clear, this individual is a male who identifies as transgender. For example, some people have different preferences in relation to how they refer to individuals, and that's cool. But being descriptive and using sex-based language when appropriate. Seeking systems-based responses to unacceptable behaviour, because for far too long, I believe there have been behaviours from certain individuals that have not been acceptable, but have gone under the radar, so to speak. And they need to start being recorded as unacceptable. For example, in terms of the using intimidation spoke of the Duluth Wheel, multiple comments to women about how they will refer them to police could perhaps relate to that. Some of the things that women can do, and men, obviously, who seek to support women, these behaviours need to be interrupted, and that's what we do in terms of domestic and family violence, and that's what I submit we should be doing in relation to these behaviours. So documenting the behaviours and reporting the behaviours to, as recommended in all protective behaviours training, documenting and reporting to people who can help. So your local council, your local state member, your local federal member, federal and state policing ministers, including the federal police, and also including and considering the special rapporteurs for violence against women and their causes and consequences, as well as the special rapporteur on torture and other cruel and inhuman, degrading treatment and punishment. And I refer to them in particular in relation to men being placed in women's prisons, which I have a special interest in ensuring does not occur. But unfortunately, it is occurring. Also, there are many women in Australia and internationally who are working on this issue, and they could also help.